Right? Right. Hopefully we won't be going that late. That's hard on everybody. It's hard on us. If we have to, I will know, probably I'll know a little closer. It depends on if we have to back up the program earlier, because there's so much being brought through that there's no way I'll be able to get it down in the small break periods that we have. And the beloveds control the release of the data. And so does the condition of the planetary grids and the shield. All right, there are certain times when natural pulse waves come in, and they will ride the data in on those, and that's when it's there for me to translate. I can show up on time, but I can't teach you anything if I don't know it yet, and that's why we go on guardian time a lot. So hopefully we won't have to, but they're saying to at least expect, even if we stay completely on schedule for the rest of everything, do expect to have some late. They'll try to have us out no later than 4 in the morning on Monday, possibly earlier. Well, all right. Well, at least they gave us warning, because usually when it gets when the things go that late, we don't know until we're in the middle of it, and then people are like going, "Oh my God, my plane's leaving now! Right, I've got to run," and that kind of thing. So they are saying they will try very much to have it done all by then, so everybody can at least catch their planes and hopefully get some sleep first. If they can do it earlier, they will. All right, they said they're waiting too. They're waiting and watching the pulse cycles that are happening right now with the gyrodome, with the Aurora platforms, and they have to see certain acceleration levels. As this wave comes in, it's coming in from density to Edonic, which is the middle domain, Sirius B, which is considered the central sun of the host chain. And they're watching and waiting too. They have their job on Eartha. The beloveds have their job on Eartha. The beloveds on Sirius B, the Magi, have their jobs there, where they're waiting. They're observing this natural phenomena occurring. They know what to do when it occurs. They are running shields and different type of things, like what we call Shadra shields, which are like what we were doing in the 12 tribes classes, but bigger. But they can't control what it does. They can just gently nudge it. Like if it's coming in and it's erratic, they can help stabilize it so it doesn't make a mess on their stars and those kind of things. So we're all kind of like waiting together as these pass through. They'll come through Sirius B, and then they'll come down through actually Sala, which we don't see Sala, because Sala is a sun that is visible from Eartha. And it will come through Sala, through to Eartha, and then down, and actually from Sala down to our soul sun, and over to Eartha, then Eartha down to Earth. So there's this literal chamber of energy that is opening, that is coming down, and that is what the what do they call it? The Sala Kali passage, Sala Kali chamber, that opens through the Sala Kali Kryst wave. There we go. And I'll be able to say these things faster probably by Sunday. So I should get a little tongue-tied. So we have a celebration coming, the kale-hara, the universal kale-hara, and our solar system's alignment with it. It has begun, and it is the point of no return. It is the point of, it is a point of return or no return. It is the point where you don't stop it at that point. When the end vibration of a universal Kali Yuga cycle has struck, that's it. That's when we go into the Adashi cycles, or the turnaround part of the Adashi cycles. That is the things that the Mayans were trying to predict, and except they were just doing it on a planetary and solar level. They weren't even aware of the difference between those and the larger levels. So when they talk about the Kali, the K-A-L-I, Yuga, Y-U-G-A, they're talking about the little ones on the planetary levels. Even on little ones, they are end times. They are the end of one cycle. Now, you don't do a full Adashi turnaround unless you're aligning with a universal one, from what they've said. So we are aligning with the one for this Ekaveka system. This Ekaveka system triggered its Kali Yuga end vibration because it went into fall and reached a certain level of acceleration. Because once a fall starts and the staff of the Kale-hara grid breaks off from the Eka in the universal Veka system, it begins a process of heating and rapid spin of the seed atom in that universal Veka system. And that begins a process of what will eventually be spewing energy and that kind of thing. But it is that point that vibration strikes, and anything that can catch the turnaround wave, or the kale-hara, will have the upper, or the kali, go through the kale-hara to get to the kali-krysta. They will be able to pull out of the fall. There's not always a fall every time you hit the turnaround point. Some systems, nothing ever falls. They never have that path. The path is always available, but some things continually, just everything in them, continually cycles back in through ascension. And this happens to be a system where its natural healing process does involve some things falling and going into the space dust path, and some things taking the window out back into the domain before, the Eden domain, in a cycle where they'll have to rebirth back out into the outer domain. And that will be quite a long time before that rebirth occurs. But it is still allowing them to stay on a potential, catch the next end of Kali Yuga cycle, where they will still be able to experience an ascension. So we're in the middle of something huge, and as and I will do our best and to translate the information the beloveds bring to us. The beloveds, there are so many beloveds, we just call them beloveds at this point because there are so many of them. I mean, a long time ago we started with the Guardian Alliance. They were the local chapter of the Krystics, right? Then that went up. We went from the Guardian Alliance up into the Ioni, and the Ionis, or the Grand Ionis, and then the Ioni. And then they crossed over to the Adori side into the Adonai, and then we got into the hubs with the Hathors, and then they brought on the Aquarian matrix and all of the Aquari line races, and that's when we got to know about the Crystal River host and all of those things that we'll touch on as we move into this information tomorrow. So I just call them the Krystic beloveds. Yeah. They are the Krystics, K-R-Y-S-T-I-C-S, like mystics with a K-R, right? So, and Krystics simply refers to those who are still aware of and continually choose to use their free will in service to the eternal life, first creation, Krystic path, the original legion of the Kryst. And you don't have to be Christian to do that. You can be any religion you want to be. Because the Christian teachings no longer hold those truths either. They hint at them, but they don't hold them anymore. They give false promises of ascension. And they give false absolutions through false priests who don't even know how to run frequency consciously anymore. What was a priest for in the first place? I mean, the job. What was that job for? To pat people on the back or try to make them feel guilty so they come and say their Hail Marys? There was a job that priest was about. It was one who could transmit the frequencies required to do whatever the next level of natural eternal light body activations were. And the priests don't remember. They're not taught because all of that was taken out of the books. And it's not just priests, it's clergy of any kind. And I just be careful about... I talk about Christians because at least they don't come and try to kill you, right? They might not like you and they might want to burn your books on Sunday, but at least they don't put out official edicts. There are certain things that we could teach about all of the religions here. If we taught certain things, you can find these out once you get into the Ascension Earth, because you'll be safe there, or will be safe there, or whoever's teaching you will be safe there. But there are certain belief systems on the planet that will literally, if we released the history, where it came from, and the truth about that, we would be killed. We would be jihaded. There's a few others. I don't know what they call it in the Hebrew faith, but there's a few. Just about every religion has a hit squad, an undercover, quiet, high echelon control group, posse. That anybody that crosses lines too far, unfortunately, Christians they have them too, but they run around in all sorts of other organizations, knights this, knights that, and all of that kind of thing. Builders, yeah, things like that. Builder burgers. No. So there's a lot of information that the beloveds could release. However, it's more important that Ajay and Max stay living and breathing on planet long enough to help you guys have the information you need to get out of here. And if certain things really, we could prove all sorts of things. But if we did, do you think we'd live very long? No. They would take us out very quickly. We don't have to prove it. But whoever feels it's the right place to be, you're welcome to join us. And it's kind of funny because there's usually people that are of those, some of the high echelon spy groups and those kind of things that are watching out for each religion. They're usually a few with us all the time. Not the same ones either. They'll come in, they'll do workshops here and there and that kind of stuff. And that's fine. They're welcome too, because they're souls and spirits in bodies here too. And maybe they started being around for one thing, but they actually find there's something here that makes more sense than what they thought they were serving. What most people don't know about certain groups is they're actually Luciferians, like the Builders, the Free Builders. They serve Lucifer. Lucifer, unless you know the direct difference, is akin to Satan, right? It's a cover for a Satanist crew, except we've already taught, in the early days, we taught where the name Lucifer, where the name Satans, these referred to different groups of Anunnaki hybrid races that were coming in, and some of them Drac, from... they were coming in from various places during Atlantis, during the Atlantean drama. We gave the dates of that stuff, right? But these guys are still alive, well, and breathing. And I have nothing against any of them and have no desire to expose any of them. That's said for the record, as well as in general. We don't need to. What we're actually trying to do is bring the true teachings to as clearly out as we can for anybody who wants to use them, who wants to learn. You don't have to participate in it. It's always been a voluntary thing. And we hope that people in those groups, you have green dragon groups, red dragon groups, everybody's starting this underground thing about going to fight with each other, and it's going to be moved through the politics of the planet and that kind of thing. They could make life a lot easier for themselves and each other and everybody else, including we who are on the Christic path that are still here, if they would realize there are a set of teachings that they can still do whatever it is they're doing, just learn some of this, and they might reach a level of illumination that is not just Illuminati. Think about it. Are you an illumined one or an Illuminati? I'm not illuminated, right? The people that run those movements most often are dealing with, if they aren't themselves, not really humans in human masks, in human costumes. And that's okay, because they can make better choices too if they want to. And I think that's why the beloveds are nudging me to talk about that, because usually I don't like to talk about that. I really don't. It usually gets me in trouble, and I don't want to get anybody mad at me where they come and make me disappear or anything. But I think that was a message put out to all those of any faith. You can keep your faith. To all those of any race, creed, color, whatever. Illuminati, not Illuminati. It's not about exposing people and pointing fingers and making anyone wrong. It's about the fact that we have a planet right now that is living in a solar system that has entered Bardo. And that affects everyone here, be they human, non-human, visiting from elsewhere, up at Area 51, it doesn't matter. We're all involved here. And if we can start working together in certain ways, doesn't mean you have to come to workshops either. If we start working together, it will be a lot easier and a lot less painful here. If the wars occur, it will be harder here because of the frequency that will be thrown in the bombings. What that does to the planetary grid system is horrendous. Fireworks are bad enough. They shred holes in the astral body. Right? Every time you have a big fireworks display, like on July 7th, 07, in our area, right? There are huge holes ripped in not just certain aspects of the atmosphere, but in some of the protection fields as well. And that takes protection field frequency away from transmuting gamma bursts that are going to be coming off the sun. They will probably, I wouldn't doubt, if we hear something about some, or maybe because everything stops for a week, where we find some strange things happening in in spring of 2008 with the first burst. It's not going to be a huge one. It's not going to fry things, but it might whack out a few satellites and do some things that they have to at least have a cover story to explain why your iPod is not working, your computer is not working, your telephone is not working, your car is not even working. What happened? That has to do with electromagnetic fields. All right, so we may see something, official in 3D on the TV if it's working when this comes through. But it may be so mild, this one, with the transmutation field, that we don't. Fortunately, hopefully, it won't, because the longer we can go without drastic effects starting to prove it all for us, at this point, nobody has to prove anything to me. The fact that this work exists in the form it exists, I am not a genius. I could not figure this out. I'm just a secretary, and I know that. That's proof enough for me. And it's just the most amazing paradigm. But if it helps, I just wish something would happen. All these things are happening, but we never see anything on the outside. Be careful what we ask for, because there's certain hotspot points. We've always said that between 2009 and 2011, that if there were going to be war issues, as certain groups were going to try to push the war drama forward and take control here, that was a prime time. It still is. It will probably begin as far as shifts in the politics, or let's say advancements in things that are already occurring, probably somewhere in 2008, maybe summer, maybe fall. The Beloveds have said that if it goes in certain directions, because we still have probability lines, there's still free will here within the framework of the solar Bardo situation that we're in. There's still various things that the populations of the planet could choose to do. One of the things that is a potential agenda is that by about 2015, they would move us toward official disclosure. And that's when that's when we'll get special training, because official disclosure, if it looks like that's ever going to be done, the time to give the training on that is not the day before. All right? So they will let us know if that needs to be done. When I need to go. You don't feel that?
No, you need provision for the night. You're not going to get it.
Oh, okay. What time is it? Oh, gee. Am I actually almost on time? I'll be right there. Can you wait? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Anyway, I tend to meander on and on and on, especially when I don't have graphs to take me on tangents. Right. I think I accomplished what I set out to do this evening, which was to tell you a bit about what we're going to tell you. Heaven help me. Trying to tell you. I just look at this, and I cringed when I saw the one for Tenerife, too. There was just so much information on that, and so much of it I'd never heard of, or I'd heard the words, and still going, what is that? What is that? What is that? Don't have a picture, don't have a graph, don't have a clue, right? So a whole bunch of this fits into that. Not the whole thing, thankfully, but part 3 and 4 will be all new information that even the last 12 tribes class, it wasn't there for that. So it will be live stuff coming in. That's why if it gets weird timing, it'll be Sunday. Because as far as they already warned us that the activations themselves will be late. But if we have to jiggle timing around, it will be to give me enough time once the wave of data does release for me to at least scribble something down in a picture so I can point at it and show you how, hey, we're realized to be, we're realized to see. Because this information, the structure part, is so... like when we're talking about anatomy and structure and the Russia bodies and all of that. If you don't have diagrams, the diagrams are like codes. They give you huge amounts of mathematical information that just by looking at them, even if you see them fly by really fast, which they rarely do these days, I meander on them forever. But they work as codes, and sometimes they'll actually take 2 hours more just to do one graph because it was so important to get that conceptualized in a picture. Because a picture does speak 1,000 words or more, because they're all mathematical. They're all mathematical programmings that carry the information that I'm trying to describe. I can do a tiny bit of it. You say, here is this. It's shaped like this. This moves this way. That moves that way. Meanwhile, the code is there. You look at it, and you're picking up the whole frequency of it. So you're actually getting the mathematical translation of that body of data. So if we have to jiggle schedule around, it will most likely be Sunday. Hopefully we won't have to. We'll try to stick as close to this as we can, because we already know we're having a late night Sunday going to Monday morning anyway, with the activations that we need to wait for. The last thing they want me to mention is, and they threw this in right at the end, I didn't know about this one, journey to the Lehi de Salasira, the healing temple of the central sun. And that's the one that is in density 2, Eden domain, Sirius B. I've not been there before. The furthest they've ever taken us journeying, gliding, is to, in the Tribes 1 Class 6, which was the July class, where we went all the way up to density 2 Sala, which was the USG 4 that's visible from Eartha. All right, this is going up even further. This is going, if you think about, in the old days, we used to teach the real simple thing about the Kale-hara grid, and it showed which stargates were what. Well, we had Earth and Eartha, well, now that we know about Eartha, on number 3 of the Kale-hara centers. Sirius B was number 6. This is that, but taken into the Eden domain. This is our first trip fully in to Eden, and I don't know what it's going to be like, but they run these live, and it will be another one of those where the wave is released then. So it will be the first time that wave comes in, and we'll be the first group to go on this wave. And after that, they'll probably use the recording of this one as long as it comes out. So far, they've all come out that were needed. They didn't like fuzz out and equipment died, so we never got it. But that will be used as the wave. The wave that will be released in that journey for this workshop will be used for other workshops and for other people so they can begin those journeys. So it looks like it's going to be a roar. Sorry. I just look at it and go, boy. Thank you all for being here, and I hope by the end of all this you feel wonderful or happy, or I don't even know what to say by the end of this, that I just hope it's a great experience for all of us. Whatever it is, I'm glad we're together to share it. And I'm going to say goodnight, and we'll see you tomorrow at noon to begin the process. Thank you. If I look a little exhausted, it's because I've been working on getting this sequence together the way the Beloveds wanted it this time since before dawn. So I'm sorry if you get tired of waiting. I get tired of working while you're waiting as well before I get to go to work. So, but if we can survive it together, we tend to get through a lot of information that takes us to the next level. So that's what we're going to do. I think we have probably like 75 to 100 graphs that we're going to go through before your Eye of God journey. So when you take your Eye of God journey, you know precisely what it is, where it is, what it's connected to, why it's important. Before you can understand Eye of God, you need to understand what's before it. And what comes before that has to do with, well, actually, not before it. There's part of it is the spirit body before it, and then after it comes the light body we've been studying. So there's a whole sequence of parts here. We thought crystal body in K2-3 was difficult. This is huge. The crystal body that had so much detail to the teachings of the crystal body. We're just dealing with the outer domain, or the outer levels of the body, the Yukatharista levels. They are the light body levels. We're dealing now with 4 domains, just coming outward. That's without getting into the Adashi return domains. And we're dealing with the Yukatharista level, what's closer to source behind that, which is called the Rasha bodies, which are the dark matter bodies. And going past that and toward the core, we go to all the way back the starborn cycle to the Taran light seed. Then there are a bunch of things before that that have to do with what's called a Siddha cycle. And in the Siddha cycle is where the spirit body is born first. And they're finally putting together all of those pieces, because you can get so far with light body activation, but you can't get through a kale-hara cycle with just light body activation. There is something called the dhala-luma, which is a doorway to the spirit body. And there's the spirit body, just like all the other parts of the anatomy, are made of different types of gelesic radiation that start from the movement of the original first and second particle. So it's a different type of radiation energy that comes from the spirit body. Without that radiation, the outer bodies can't make the quantum acceleration that is required to make the quantum leap for the turnaround back into the Adashi cycles. So piece by piece, ever since Tenerife, actually in February 2006, they have been giving us the pieces first from the Taran coming outward with the light body, and now they're adding the rest of it, so we can start to see how the whole cycle works and what we're really a part of. What it really is not just the structure of cosmic creation, but the process of continual cosmic creation. It's how the cosmos are formed. And when we begin the process of opening the dhala-luma, as eventually we will see what that is, we start to rejoin that cosmic community, not just the local universal community or the local galactic community or the local solar community. You know, solar lords at this point, from the channeling movement and stuff, give it up. You know, these guys are like, actually, they're the ones that help the sun to go into Bardo. So those kind of lords you don't need. Lords and ladies like that are teaching you things that are not going to help you make the turnaround back to source. So what we're going to do, and there's a lot of graphology that goes with it. There's an interesting audience because most of you have some knowledge of some of the different words I've talked about. But there are some new people as well, which means you may have Kathara, but you've not heard of anything that the tribes classes had, and maybe you weren't at Phoenix, the last Phoenix workshop. So all of this stuff that has to do with aquafarians and all that may be completely foreign to you. So when there's a mix of people like that, I need to not bore the people who do know to death, and at the same time not lose completely the new people who came in. And the beloveds always resequence the material from the time before and add in the beginnings of the new pieces of what is to be learned in this workshop. That's what they've done here. That's what took so long. I had the old sequence of graphs and the way it was presented before. I had them from the last 12 tribes class, but they changed it again as far as the sequence of which that information was going to be shown, so we could get a quick crash course for everybody in the structures needed to understand the things on day 2 and the day 2 agenda. The timings aren't as important as getting the content. The content is what will help you to understand where you are, what you need to do, and why it's a celebration that we're moving into with the kale-hara cycle. So I do hope you can understand the delays in time sometimes. We try so hard. I mean, I was so happy we actually had an itinerary that had numbers on it that had to do with times. At least we got that far, which means at least we had a breakdown of sequence of how the information was to be presented. But then so far, so good. That stayed the same, at least for day 1. Just the times changed. So we're going to launch into that particular series of graphology, and it's going to start with the light body, Rasha body, dark matter, and first creation information. This will give you the first dispensations of information that were given on the dark matter templates and dark matter body, which is called the Rasha body. We call it Rasha to refer to all of the Rashas because we have 4 outgoing domains: the core, the inner, the middle, and the outer, in what are called the Akashi expansion cycles. And in each one of those, there is a Rasha body layer. And we have different names for each of the Rasha body layers. We kind of refer to them all as the Rasha bodies in general when we're just talking about that particular part of anatomy. But it applies to each part, each domain level has one. So we will go into that information. We'll move then from what that has to do with what that structure of the Rasha bodies, first of all, where it comes from in relation to the Taran light seed, and that in relation to the first Partakai. And from there, we'll go into the domain cycles, evolution, and ascension, where we start to see the Akashi and the Adashi cycles. This is where they started adding new information, where I knew I was in trouble, actually, at home. They told me to bring the pens that I can write on Mylars with, which means there's not even going to be time to do new graphs. You're going to scribble stuff right on top of it in a different color so you can tell read what you're supposed to read. And we have some of those. So they started giving us more information on the domains and cycles. There's something flying. This was, all right. I think the fly wants to speak. Okay. Anyway, they gave us some new information that will tie right into tomorrow's information, that will take us from what we've already known, get a little bit of the new information to make the bridge into the more complicated things we're going to learn tomorrow. So I will simply qualify this graphology sequence before you experience it, as this is the easy stuff, the stuff that's already known. And just remember that by the time we're done with this part, right? All 100 graphs or whatever it is. And anyway, when we go through that, we will then, at the end of the first part 1, deal with the Rasha body, what's called prana exchange, and the Navajo cycles. And this is where they also added new information on understanding where the Navajo cycles fit in relation to Yuga cycles. So we're learning bits of that. They also began information on what is called, and they never talked about this before, the Hara cycles. All right, the one that applies to this outer domain where the turnaround happens to be the kale-hara cycle, and that's what we are entering as of tomorrow. So they are preparing us for the next level of activations because our solar system and our universal Veka is going through these activations, and if our bodies are going to be able to tolerate it, it's not only because it'll be fun to ascend and it's better than the other options, but it's also about health, because the frequencies that will be coming through our solar system, they will be coming not just from our sun, they will be coming from the center of the Milky Way, they will be coming from the Sirius B system, the outer part of it that is fallen. The Eden part's not fallen, but the outer part is, and it will be coming from Andromeda, the fallen part of Andromeda, which is in the outer bodies. All right, so there are frequencies coming in here that are going to progressively create conditions that lots of people who write shows about end times put on TV, but most people really don't think will happen. They can happen, and the chances are some of them will. And the first thing is going to be the diseases, all right, with all sorts of things like viruses and bacteria waking up in relation to the new frequencies that are coming back in that were here once upon a time, a long time ago. Some of these frequencies were here. And during those times, certain types of life forms lived, and others didn't. And this is, we've been seeing what we call when species go extinct. What you're actually seeing is the biology of a certain type of species has a certain shield template and DNA template that is designed by whoever designed it to hold X amount of frequency. And during the times in a time cycle when that frequency is on the planet, that is when those consciousness will be manifest in those biological forms. When species start to fade out, or when they start to lose the reproductive ability, which the human race is starting to do. That's why there's so many clinics trying to help people have babies with help, because it's not happening naturally like it once did. The frequency changes on the planet depending on what your shield and DNA are holding and have activated and can receive and process will depend on whether you can survive quantum leaps in frequency. Natural stellar activation cycles are quantum leaps in frequency. When we get to the end of a full Kali Yuga on a universal level alignment, that's frequency. That's the highest frequency that will ever come in here. If there wasn't a host intervention being directly done, the human race would become extinct within probably about 50 years. And so would all of the things we consider life forms that walk around. There would still be other things left, certain types of bacteria, certain types of viruses, those kind of things, because they have a different makeup. And they, from what I hear, they span D1 and D2 frequency, where their shield templates are designed a little bit differently than things that walk around and are large in size. So they can actually tolerate certain frequencies, and they go to sleep if those frequencies aren't there. There are bacteria from the first beginning, seeding 1, when Earth and the solar system were seeded, that have been asleep since seeding 1. This is the end cycle from seeding 1, 2, and 3. When these frequencies begin to come in, they're going to start to wake those things up. It will create mutations in existing known viruses as well, where you will find things accelerating beyond the vaccinations that have been developed, and that's already happening. But it will happen at an increased rate. When it's going to start to become in your face a real problem, I am not sure. Maybe they'll give us more of a clue on that by tomorrow's end. But all of the information that you're learning now, it's not just about the lovely spiritual stuff. It's also about very practical biological stuff, because there really is no separation between your spiritual selves and your matter selves. The only separation really you could look at between those two is a light body and a matter body. And they're actually connected to the spirit body. But they're structures of light, structures of radiation. But the spirit body's frequencies are the strongest that exist, and they are the one set of frequencies that will allow the bodies of, and there's many other things we can help besides just the human race. It will allow the bodies to purge the mutations that are blocking the natural frequencies of the light body in the first place, and it will allow the stronger frequencies to come in that will naturally harmonize with the frequencies that come in when the dhala-luma opens. When we open our own dhala-lumas, it lets our own spiritual body energies in, and those energies are compatible with the energies of the cosmic spiritual bodies or the universal spiritual bodies. So becoming spiritual is actually becoming a necessity for survival on this planet. The people who do achieve this, even just partially, will actually be a walking buffer field collectively on the planet that will help protect other life forms that otherwise would die of the radiation frequencies coming in very quickly. So when you learn about the things that are way out there, like Rasha bodies, and they seem way far away in cosmic structure and that kind of thing, just remember the context they fit into, as these are not just about spiritual, they're also about healing and about health and about being able to move through a set of circumstances that are occurring in a solar system that our planet happens to live in and we happen to live on. So it's all very united and very connected. Anyway, I think we'll start with the light body, Rasha body, dark matter, and first creation. And take it from there. I'm going to take this off. Alrighty, here we go. This is just a really rough, like I said, there's not time to typeset diagrams anymore. There hasn't been for about 3 years, and it's not getting any better. One of these days, these will be in books, and they will be typeset. That will be the first book, the Kale-hara book. But the first summary, it's about the stages, the first creation cycle. And we've always talked about how creation starts with Partakai 1, the first Partakai, and then moves on from there. We learned in Tenerife 2006 about the light-born cycle, through which the Taran light seed is born, and then the Taran light seed goes through certain cycles that are called the star-born cycle, and through this, the seed atom is born. And from that, eventually, you get to the outer Yucatharista body that we started our teachings with when we started Kathara. That's way down here. If creation starts up here, goes into creation of the seed atom, or the unici seed atom, which is the inner domain seed atom, then there's this whole other cycle here that's called the life-born cycle. This cycle is the Rasha cycle. It is the cycle where the Rasha bodies, the dark matter bodies, are created. And science talks about here, about there must be, they theorize, there must be a dark matter somewhere, because they can tell by the movement of the matter that they can see that something is influencing it that can't be identified in the spectrum that can be seen. So they refer to it as dark matter because it can't be seen. It's actually a form of light and sound that can be seen depending on where you're standing. When you're in an outer domain, it's at a different angular rotation of particle spin, and also a different what's called BPR, or base pulse rhythm, which means it pulses at a rate that is not perceivable from the outer domain bodies. But it is the controlling structure, it's what is called the elemental command structure, that actually creates and organizes what become the elements here. It creates the, participates in creation of the spark pulses of frequency that become quarks. Quarks are what get together to form things like protons and neutrons, which get together and form things like atoms, which gets together and forms things like elements, etc., as matter goes. So these are the templates that actually set the core structures. They're right in here between the starborn cycle, where the light body begins to be born. Then you have the dark matter templates. Then you have the light body being born. And the light body is where matter happens. It's actually between the interaction of these, that matter as we know it, as the shell, that we walk around in, or the shell that we see as solid, the frozen light. This forms, I believe, in between here and here. So what we're going to learn about first are the rasha templates and how they connect to the tar and the light seed, how that connects to the first partikai. So we begin to understand the process by which first creation is set in motion, and it's a continual motion because it's a circulation of consciousness. That the consciousness of God Source itself forms the first partikai, and from forming the first partikai and the second partikai, it literally, within its own consciousness field, grows this structure that first becomes a spirit body that we'll learn about tomorrow, then becomes the tar and light seed, and from there the light body evolves, from there the dark matter templates evolve, so you have the inner light body, the dark matter templates, and the outer light bodies and matter. So it's a whole sequence, and it's not just one sequence. It's a sequence that's repeated 4 times in 4 levels of quantum expansion. There is a point at which, if a universe is expanding, a natural universe will not expand and expand and expand until all of its pieces lose each other and it falls apart. Like a solar system will not expand like that. The universe will not expand like that. There is a point of stop and turn around, or stop and fall, or stop and take a step back. So we're going to, by understanding rasha structure, we will understand a part of this process. From there, we'll be able to start understanding the domains, and from the domains, we'll be able to understand a bit about the expansion cycles themselves and how they work. And it is the expansion cycles that we, in a manifest form, are experiencing as space-time experience, as being in space-time and matter. We are experiencing part of the light body. We wouldn't be experiencing part of the cosmic light body and the universal light body as a solid 3-dimensional holographic field if we didn't have our own structure that is a microcosm of the macrocosmic structure. So as we're learning about the macrocosmic structure, just like when we talked about the outer domains, we're also learning about the microcosmic self and your structure of your light body. That means you have a rasha body. And by the end of the rasha part, it's kind of funny when you find out where your rasha body is, because you've been talking to it all along if you did Kathara 1. Right? So anyway, next one, please. I'll get to that one later. I haven't had time to upgrade some of these, and some of them the wordings aren't perfect. I just wanted to use this diagram. I'm not going to read all this. This is in the K23 manual, I believe. Just to remind you of the Kathara grid structure, the first encryption that has the 12 vibration radiation points. And these encryptions are actually formed in the imprint of the first partikai because they are characteristic of the consciousness stream or the consciousness focus of God Source. And the closest substance you could say that is made out of, it's called the Eta Or. The Eta Or field is the closest thing you could say would be ethers. All right, so it is actually a type of energy, the consciousness field of Source. Energy before it becomes energy. Energy while it is consciousness is considered, where it's pure consciousness, source consciousness, is considered the Eta or the ethers for short. All right. So anyway, this structure comes literally because the consciousness of Source holds this structure as its own imprint. It is the core structure that Source itself is made of. And when we'll talk briefly about, in a minute, about how the first partikai is formed, when the first partikai is formed, that imprint or core encryption is embedded into, and it becomes the organizational focus of the first partikai. And from there, it also goes into the second partikai, and they interact with each other, and that encryption carries forth. And this is where we get the kryst code from, the mathematical realities that have to do with quantum and quantum balances. If Source is a non-quantifiable field, consciousness field, there's a part of it that forms within itself as a quantified field. And that has very specific quantums of energy, and that is where we end up with the spirit body forming, and then the inner light body forming, the rasha bodies forming, and the outer light body and matter forming. So it all takes place within the consciousness field of Source, and it all is built on this natural encryption. In the outer domains, things can become damaged, and we'll see a while later when we get into the Eye of God constructs. We'll see why there's a vulnerability, just a temporary vulnerability, in the outer domains compared to the others. There's a greater vulnerability for fall or losing one's way to happen, where you end up messing up your encryption, where you can't ascend anymore. But there's also the biggest reward at the end of this cycle, the outer domain cycle as well, and that is the kale-hara cycle and the ability to go through the Adashi turnaround and go through the fully re-spiritualization cycles, which they're transcendent levels of consciousness that are just ecstatic, where you can have form and you can enjoy the domains, whichever ones you choose progressively as you move through the Adashi cycles. But the separation between your spirit body and your light body and your Rasha body goes away, where you can manifest in a Rasha, you can manifest in an outer domain body, you can manifest wherever you want, because you actually are made of pure spirit at that point, where the polarities that keep those parts of structure separate progressively reunite until you reach the original point of full union, which is the completion of a Dashi 3 cycle and going back into source. And at that point, you have what's called a full Kryst star activation. And they're going to teach us more about that part tomorrow. But first, we're going to learn the structures that by the end of which we'll understand a bit more about what the kale-hara is, because the kale-hara on the universal level in this universal Vecca system does begin tomorrow. It anchors on this planet tomorrow. You can look at it this way, too, and in this solar system. You could look at it, too, as maybe simpler, that the universal kale-hara is taking place, and because of what has transpired here on this planet, our frequencies in this planet, our core encryption, and in our sun, have aligned directly with the universal kale-hara. So we are not only experiencing an end-time cycle for a planet or for a solar system, we are aligning with the full end-time cycle of this universal Vecca. But it is also the restart time. It is also the time when whatever will fall, or it will step back and have to rebirth in its consciousness field, come out and do it again, or it will ascend. It is a hosted ascension at this point because the damage in this system is so large. But the fact that that still exists is amazing. So these are the structures that you will see now that have to do with understanding the structure of your bodies, your spiritual bodies, your light bodies, your matter bodies, and how to get them into a Kryst star activation for the kale-hara cycle. That's just to remind you of the particular proportions of the Kathara grid. They're very specific. I won't go over this again right now, because I've done it a million times in other workshops. This is to remind you of the partikai. Partikai breaks down into a partike and a particum. And these two things phase together with the sound of one hand clapping, and spark, send a backflow spark into source, into the creation point door, which is the center of the first partikai, and then source responds by sending a backflow return spark of equal quantum back out. And this is the beginning process. It is through the phasing of the first partikai that you get the building of the spirit body and the light body structures. Next one, please. We cleaned this one up a little because we've been using one that was part of something else that I couldn't even see what I was looking at. This is just a simple rendition of, I'm not going to go heavily through this because there are other times and places when we will detail all of this in writing. And we have talked about this part pretty extensively in, I think, in the Tenerife workshop, and possibly even in Morocco we got into this, I think, before it became Demon Fest. Morocco trip was rough. Anyway, this would be Partikai 1. There's a whole thing of pre-Partikai birth where it talks about, and I will summarize this in simplest form, how did that first Partikai get there in the first place? Got the unquantifiable consciousness field of God Source. And God Source is alive, is intelligent. Well, what it did within its own self, almost like within your own mind, it focused a stream of energy or attention in front of itself, in front of where it was pointing. Now it can look out in all directions, which I don't even want to go there to find out how many of these creation structures there might be. We're just trying to figure out the one we all exist in at the moment. But if you can look at, imagine you're in your mind and your source, but you don't have a body surrounding you. You're not contained by a body. You're limitless. And you're aware. And there's a level of thinking that is not linear exactly there, but linear thinking perhaps even started where Source learned that it could focus. Kind of like a baby coming into the world with eyes, and they're all blurry and they can't focus yet and that kind of thing. And eventually the eyes learn to focus. When Source, I don't even know if you could say learn to focus, because technically it always did. And when we get to that level of how'd that start, I don't even want to go there. How did God Source start? Did God Source ever not be? I don't think so. I don't think that there is a place anywhere that God's source is not. It is just a condition, an existing condition of what reality is. And all reality takes place within it. So there isn't anything outside of it, because space, time, and matter take place, all of it, within the source consciousness field. But in forming the first particle, the basic concept is source focused a beam of its consciousness, or a train of thought, or a line of energy from itself, from its own consciousness, into its own consciousness field in front of itself. And that particular beam of energy warmed. Now remember, the consciousness field itself is formed of the ethers, or the ethers. That consciousness focus actually warmed that particular area of the ethers. And in that warming, a gelling started to take place, not while the consciousness focus was on it, and this has something to do with thought manifestation and how it works, but the original warming that made it more fluid, made that area of the consciousness field more fluid, or not quite fluid, but say plasma-like or gel-like. And then the consciousness was turned elsewhere for a moment, say God looked away from what it had just looked at and focused on. And in that looking away, it cooled again. And the radius, however much consciousness focus source had put into that one spot, had a particular radius of warming from its center point. That center point is the creation point. That radius of warming around it created, when source took its attention away, created a recooling of that area, but an interaction between the portions of the quantum of itself that had been warmed, and they start interacting. And this is where we actually start getting the beginnings of electromagnetism and those kind of things. And the first particle, in simple terms, forms from first the warming by the heat of the consciousness focus, and then the focus looking away for a moment, and that cooling and gelling, and forming a quantified, solid, more solid form of consciousness within the consciousness field. When source looked back again and warmed the same area again, more of a quantum in the same area went through the same thing, and that's how particle 2 was born. But when that happened, that's when all sorts of wonderful things took place. That's when creation was set in motion. Particle 1 alone is like the potential for light and life. It is when particle 2 is created and comes in and splits particle 1 and begins the phasing process, where you have a particle, and a particle. That is the process by which sparks are generated. When the two parts of the split one come back together, they spark and send a backflow back through the creation point door in the center. And when that happens, that spark goes into the source consciousness field, I believe probably warms another bit and brings a backflow return of equal quantum back out. And this is how, by the generation of sparks from that first particle, that literally quantum expansion occurs. And from this, the spirit body, and then the light body, and the spirit body, the inner light body, the Rashi body, and the outer light body and matter bodies are formed. And it all starts there with one single point of focus. You can look at the creation point as the still point, the first point of source focus. And it's from that point that original warming emanated out. And it emanated out basically in 12 different directions because of the base 12 code that the consciousness source, and thus the beam of consciousness of source, carried as its core radiation encryption. So the ethers themselves represent a form of radiation, but perhaps a form of radiation that isn't radiating outward yet. And that is what starts the whole thing of particle 1, and then particle 2 being formed in the same place with the creation point at the center. That splits particle 1 to a PCM, particle, and a PK, particle. And that's particle 1. Now here's what happens in a little bit more clear form. You have particle 1 gets split by particle 2. Particle 2 takes the place, same place in the consciousness field of source, of particle 1. Particle 1 is now in two pieces, but they're hooked together at the center by the pull of the creation point. There's a lot more to this about flames and things that we've covered at other times. I'm not even going to try to go there right now. There's too much other things to cover. But that creation point, actually, while the creation point can open and close, and what allows it to open, so these things can go back in and do it all over again, is the fact that these things make a spark when they hit each other, when they come back together, because one has a negative charge and electrical charge, and the other, the particle K, has a positive electrical charge. And when they come back together, they draw back together because of those charges. And when they draw back together, they make a spark that is equal to the quantum that they together have. So these two replicate and make another quantum that equals the sum of both of those. What that looks like in simple terms is here you still have particle 2 here. All right? But now, where particle 1 split was here, they've moved together to the center. Here's where they spark. And this point here is where they actually spark. Particle 1 reassembles itself here. So this is the first spark. This is called the atomic spark, and it's in front of the creation point door. All right? Now, if the source beam came in this direction, let's just say, this would be source looking, say, ahead of itself and warming that spot there. All right? And that spot there is here. Source field, where its beam came, is from here. Here it's looking outward. This is in front of the creation point door, the original point of focus, and that is in back of where source is. So this starts a division, actually, that they're going to talk to us more about tomorrow. That's why they wanted me to clean this graph up, so I could show you where this starts in some of the things you have seen, because they're going to take it into understanding more about the forms of energy that happen from this point. But in the simplest terms, first we have the particle 1 splitting because particle 2 comes in. Particle 2 is still out in creation point. Creation point door is there. But this spark that was made by the coming together of the particum and particle of particle 1 actually sparks open the creation point door. Now, this spark, if you notice, they split this way. The consciousness of source came this way, and the particle 2 is also projected in the same direction, came this way. It splits the particle 1 forward, or this way. Now, if you're looking at this as if it were the side, this would be down, and that would be up. Right? But if you're looking at this as front and back, this would be front and that would be back. So it depends on how you look at these diagrams, actually, because you're dealing with spheres on sticks. Right? Think of like round marshmallows on toothpicks. Someday I'm probably going to have to build those just to figure out who's an exact what angular rotation to what. Because when you draw them in circles, it's very hard to tell. And I think there's a point where you can take it either way, and it basically comes out to be the same thing. But anyway, there's going to be a point where we talk about what is in front of creation point door and what is behind creation point door. Because the spirit body lives behind creation point door. It's something that forms back behind there, and the light body is something that forms in front of creation point door. Part of it is back there, just like part of the spirit body comes out here, and in between those you end up with several structures that have to do with what's called the akushite, the rushite, the rishite, and the rasha bodies. So it all has to do with what's before the creation, in front of the first creation point, or in back of the first creation point. So the information, it's complicated to even try to describe it. So I'll try to keep it simple with the understanding of the particle, because we've talked about this a lot of times before. I think most people have some idea of how the particle phases and makes sparks and all that. The particle 1 spark is the one that breaks in front, that splits in front of creation point door. That creates what is known as the atomic field. All right? When they come back together, they spark in front of creation point door. So the first backflow spark is an atomic spark. It is considered, and this gets interesting. So it's a split that goes frontwards, or they use up and down a lot with this too. They call it a down split. If you were looking at this as down and this is up, you could also say it's a front split. And that would be a back split. But let's just use the up and downs for now, looking at it in that way. So this is splitting down. All right? Particle 1 splits down. Particle 1 always splits down. It will always split down. And particle 1, when it splits and comes back together in sparks, will always create atomic sparks. The atomic spark actually is created here, right there, at that spark point. And then the spark atmic spark 1 and Partakai 1 go back together, and they both move back to creation point. They go through the creation point because the spark actually triggers a reaction here that opens the creation point door. That has to do with an flame. And when the creation point door opens, the backflow spark flows back into source. The spark goes back into source, but it doesn't break Partakai 2 yet. Could we get over here, please, a little bit more, where my words are? All right. Now, Partakai 1 and backflow 1 spark return to source. So this larger field that came from the splitting of the Partakai contract again, where you just have the size of a Partakai, but it happens to be still Partakai 2 with the creation point in the center. Now, when it goes into the source field, if you're looking at this is the top, and this is the bottom, and this, you're looking at the front of it. If you wanted to look at it that way, you could look at all of those that way as well. The reason you're not seeing it right now is if you're looking at it head on, because it went back behind the creation point door. So it's in the part of the three-dimensional diagram that you can't see on the two-dimensional surface. All right, that's why it's not drawn there. It goes back in there. There's things that happen back here. If you were looking at it, in the other perspective, you would see back in here in the consciousness field of source, there's a thing that starts to happen here that becomes where the spirit body forms. And that is where the quantum of spark 1, the atmic spark, is replicated by an equal quantum or given an equal quantum back from the source consciousness field and the spirit body. And it allows for Partakai 1 to come back out with its first backflow return spark. And the backflow return spark will come out through the creation point door, same place, same creation point, and it's the return spark, and with Partakai, coming back with Partakai 1, that splits Partakai 2. Partakai 2 always splits because the movement is coming down. It actually makes Partakai 2 split. If you're looking at it frontwards and backwards, backward, or if you're looking at it as up and down, it splits up. They call it the up split. All right. The up split means there will be a spark up here made when those two parts of Partakai 2 come back together. This creates what's called the etheric field. So you have atmic sparks that happen down here from Partakai 1 and etheric sparks that happen up here from Partakai 2. This gets into also when the backflow sparks return from either one of them. You'll have some that come out with their tops down, which will be the atmic ones, and others that will come out of creation point but go up, and their top point will be up. Right? Their top pole, because they're spherical, will be up. This is where you get up quarks and down quarks and those kind of things with these backflow return sparks. The backflow return sparks form what science here calls quarks. They actually are smaller. Eventually, they form quarks as the light body builds from this first set of movements. So I just wanted you to see a little more closely, because we have bounced over this a lot since we talked more deeply about it in Tenerife, and there are new people and some people that didn't do the Tenerife thing that might not have heard enough of that to really understand the point. I think the point that they most want to make about this is the behind, or you can look at it as either above the creation point or below it, or behind source's focus or in front of it, because that creates a line that the relationships of quantum between these two creates all the forces that we know, like the force of gravity and the forces of the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and the electromagnetic force. They're all created by the relationship to the quantums or the quantified energy that are before and or in front of and in back of the creation point, the core creation point. So literally, cosmic structure, the entire cosmos, does have one singularity from which the entire thing emerged. And that process is repeated many, many, many times through the building and growing of the light body structures and all of that. So when science here says, well, we have a universe, we have lots of universes in the light body structure. We started to learn that with the Eucharistic body when we were just studying the outer light bodies. But it does start with a singularity. And that singularity occurs before the dark matter templates are formed. So there is a connection between what science has been trying to theorize and what actually does occur in the very spiritual teachings of natural spiritual science, which is the first creation sequence of the kryst. And again, anybody doesn't know, the reason it's called the kryst is it has to do with the first sounds that are made, the karaya, sa, ta, hala. And that is where the kryst comes from. It has to do with the first encryptions or vibration points and the first ones that can be audibly translated into a sound that you could make out here. All right, so that is where the word kryst comes from. So it's not just that, we're all Christians and it means everybody else's religion doesn't mean anything. It's not about that at all. The kryst belongs to every religion. The kryst is the original legion. So anyway, we get back to this. We're only at the point here where Partakai 2 splits and creates the etheric field. It makes etheric sparks up here and comes back together. Its sparks come downward. Their backflow sparks come downward back into creation point, and creation point or source sends them back, and it sends them back upward because they will be sent. The backflow spark will come back out in the direction it was sent in. So we end up with sparks forming up here and sparks forming here. At this point, we have spark 1, the atomic spark down here, and here's where Partakai 2 went back in. When Partakai 2's backflow spark comes back out, backflow return spark comes back out, it splits again Partakai 1. And then Partakai 1 goes through its phase again, down here. So it makes another spark. What you end up with are one atomic spark, one etheric spark, and another atomic spark. But this one starts out here. When the next one comes back down and hits it, it makes that one spin over in that direction and this one spin over in this direction. So spark 3 ends up taking on the opposite charge, even though it's atomic. And this construct here is called the Taran. And that is the Taran light seed that we've talked about before. I wanted to show you this just briefly for several reasons. One, because inside of the Taran there's this seemingly magical structure that forms that's called the Partakai. It is different than these. These are replicas of Partakai quantum, so they're considered Partakai sparks. Something else happens with this that creates what would have been the fourth spark that would have been up here. Something happens with an interaction between all of them and a whole bunch of things that happen between when spark 4 is made on the second up phase, spark 4 gets made, starts to go in, something happens right there, a whole bunch of things happen. That's where we jumped when they first taught us this. So we'd learn light body first. They taught us that once they just said it forms you have the three sparks, the fourth spark goes into the center, they interact with each other, and it creates this thing called the Partakai. The Partakai is the first 15 Jaleesic layer structure, a photogenerator cell, and it is the process of the Partakai in the center of the Taran having the outer sparks rub against the layers of that those inner layers of that center one that literally create the spark pulse currents and allow for the quantum building that allows for growth and expansion of the light body structure. But before we get to the Partakai, and I have a feeling the Partakai represents the Rasha body of, I think, of the, they haven't exactly clarified that, of the core domain, I think. Right? And then it moves outward from there in the other domains after the light body is built. But right in here, we're going to see later, I have the same diagram with some scribbles here that indicate at the point where the Partakai 2 is going through its second split, so you already have two atomic sparks down here and one etheric one up there. It was about ready to make its next etheric one up there. It did make the spark, the backflow spark, but that backflow spark, there was enough quantum generated that created a reaction. And this is where we end up with what is called the Kusha cycle, or the Akushate cycle. After the Akushate cycle, there's something called the Rushate cycle. After the Rushate cycle, there's something called the Rishate cycle. And through those cycles, the spirit body is born behind and part of it crossing the door. All right? And from there, that is when the Taran becomes born. So this set of cycles that happen by the time you have the three sparks before the Partakai births as the fourth central spark in that cluster of sparks formed by this light-born cycle. There is this whole, what is called a SEDA, S-E-D-A cycle. And a SEDA cycle, we'll later see, is a specific place on what we call the tachyon cycle, or tachyon 12 cycles. So we're going to look at those two, and they all come out of this point. So tomorrow and a little bit today, we're going to learn about some of the things that happen in between there before the Taran is born, but after this. Now, the first thing that happens is we end up with a triad being born. All right, the triad is simply the 1, 2, 3. Okay? Be it this one or the one where Partakai 2 is up phasing. It doesn't matter. This is called an up phasing one. The etheric is up phasing from Partakai 2, and the atmic is down phasing from Partakai 1, which means it phases or comes together to spark with its pointed down or pointed in front, depending on which angle we're looking at it. So we have down phasing and up phasing, and we end up with 3 sparks being formed. Those 3 sparks form what is known as the triad. Okay, or actually, no, the 3 sparks. Sorry, I just got twisted there. The 3 sparks form the. I'm a bit tired. The 3 sparks form the Taran later, but it is the breaking of the Partakai, one Partakai, and connected to a whole Partakai that forms what's called the triad. And at that point, the triad phases, goes through spark generation cycles of this spinning around, and it generates enough quantum through the Siddha cycle. And through all the quantum generated on the other side of the door, it ends up creating the Taran. In this first Akusha cycle that happens after the triad cycle, where the triad forms, this is where the Eye of God structure, that at the end of this evening's information, you will see a bit about what that is and what it looks like. That forms right on the door, with part of itself behind the door and part of itself in front of the door. So there's a lot of things that happen between when Partakai 1 and 2 got together, spark made the triad, and then that made it sparks, and then that birthed the Taran, light seed. There's a lot of things that happen in the Siddha cycle. And they're starting to show us that, because that is where we find not only where our soul is. We find our soul when we find the structure of the light body. We find our spirit, which is the eternal living essence, when we find what happens behind the creation point door and how they interact with each other. So it is a big step moving from just light body structure into beginning to understand the spirit body structure. Because a lot of people, particularly in the New Age movement, it's all the same to them. Spirit and soul, they're all the same thing. No, they're not. Spirit is the animating, conscious, living, continual force that is quantifiable. The individuation of the God self, let's say, the full God self, that exists as an individuated quantum behind the door with God's source. So individuation and the place where individuation, where you are just part of God's source and not individuated, exist behind the door together. And it means you don't lose your individuation. When you complete a full cycle of return, you go back, and your individual identity through the spirit body, and that's like, imagine yourself as a large sun somewhere. Just imagine what the consciousness of a sun thinks about, how it perceives things, because it's kind of like that when you go fully into spirit. They call it the rainbow body, the full-on rainbow body, the spirit body. It's the invisible rainbow body. So we're going to be learning about that. That's why I wanted to bring you back to first Partakai and bring you back to what happens before the Taran gets born. Next one, please. I'm going to run through quick here, knowing that those cycles are there. I want to come back to the Taran, even though we still have the Akushate cycle, the Rushate cycle, the Rishate cycle of the Siddha cycle. This is where the Taran light seed is born. After those, I wanted to show you this because to understand Rasha body first, which they want us to understand first, because there are certain activations of the Rasha body that have to be done before you can go on to opening the door that allows you to bring in the currents to the spirit body. So they want us to understand the Rasha body. We brought you back to the Taran because this is where the first appearance in the Partaki, the small center part here, this Partaki unit is here. It's about the same size as the Partakai, but this is the one that has the 15 Jalesic layers. It has 9 inner Jalesic layers, radiation layers, and 6 outer Jalesic radiation layers. And it's through the process of contraction of the spirit body from behind the creation point door that actually pulls this configuration of 3 Partakai backflow return sparks, which are called the 3 Ina, by the way, of the Ka field. Inaka, right. Anyway, the spirit body pulls them back and lets them go. When they pull back and contract, these 3 sparks rub together, and they also rub through the Jalesic radiation layers, and they make sparks in all of those layers. So this is the process by which it is considered the first photogenerator cell, because it is here that through friction, through the friction of these Jaleesic radiation layers rubbing through each other as the core contracts and expands and pulls the others in. It doesn't pull them all the way in a creation point, not yet. But it allows for the building of quantum on the outside. So the thing that was set in motion, without Source giving any more quantum directly back, no more, I mean, the backflow goes back to it and it just gives back what the backflow was. Right? It's generating and starting to build a quantum all of its own. This is why it is the beginning of life or self-sustaining energy generation. So this is where it starts. We will see this. We wanted to see this because this is the structure that when you look at this in a minute, you'll see this without the 3 Ina Partakai backflow sparks. You'll just see the 15 Jaleesic layers. That is the structure, but much larger, that the Rasha bodies take on. And it is through those structures, and they operate the same way that a Taran does, but on a much larger level. So we wanted to see what the Taran is, so you can compare where it's easy to understand. Oh yeah, okay, it's a bigger body that does that. That's, you know, it kind of in between, where I have the little Partakai, and then I have these larger structures of the Rasha body. Let's see, yeah, can we go down here a minute, honey, please? Down here, these are, remember I said how sound like kryst comes from the core encryption vibration of that particular type of Jaleesic radiation unit. All right, well, we have, these are words that are formed. They are the audible tone, core tones of each of these Jaleesic layers. They each have an encryption, a part of the original full encryption of Source, and that encryption is a vibration of radiation, a radiation vibration, and vibration makes sound. Right? So they have words. These words mean something. In fact, later when we get into what's called prana exchange and activating the Rasha body for prana exchange, we actually use these tones and combinations of them to create and generate quantum and make the Rasha bodies activate, to self-activate the Rasha bodies and get them back online again with their light bodies. So it's just, when one is at the center and they come out. The structure is also hugely important. The Rasha body structure is built on it. The Rasha body is kind of like the smaller body upon which a reflection of is made out to form the outer bodies that we call the light body structures of the Ekantharista. And that is what forms matter, the matter that we see and know. The frozen light body parts are what we call atoms and matter. So these structures, they start here right after the first Partakai and after we go through the seed cycles that we didn't look at yet. And we have the birth of the Taran light seed. That same structure, the same tones will be reflected in the Rasha bodies. We have 1, 2, and 3. They're called the Atma inner yoke. 4, 5, and 6 are called the Etha middle yoke, the Partaki. The Katha outer yoke is 7, 8, and 9 layers. 7, 8, and 9. And the 10, 11, and 12 layers are the Loja, and this becomes the Loji, or another word for God. Some people use that for God. Lojaya, I believe it's called. We get lotus out of there too somewhere. Yeah. And the Lotaya is the 13, 14, and 15. 13, 14, and 15. These structures are very specific, by the way. You'll see in a little bit that they're not just randomly placed in relation to each other. They're very specific, and they're all built upon kryst code expansion as far as quantum. There's a specific quantum formula that, as things replicate from the center, as you'll see in a second, that are through a tachyon cycle, there are very specific increments of expansion that take place. How much energy was generated, how much backflow was given, how much backflow return came back out. That means how big is that sphere. All right? So these layers are spheres. They're not just flat, and they are specific quantified forces, which means each of these are specific quantified forces. We have the nada. It's the nada or, but we usually just call it the nada at 1. The nada, the adama, the jaffa. The jaffa. We have 4, 5, and 6, the Tao, the Ida, the Jada of Ida, right? Garden of Eden. We have the 7, 8, and 9, the Ta'ur, which is just usually called the Ta field, the Maja field, which is usually just called the Ma field on 8, and the Ina Ka, but it's usually just called the Ka field on 9. K spelled K-A, not with an H, because over here you'll get into Kas with H's and Ras with H's. All right, so we've got those are the inner 9, and they form the yoke, and that what forms the outer part of this first egg of light are the 10, 11, and 12 layers. We have 10, 11, and 12 layers. They form the Ra-sha-la, And these are just the names. They're not the Rashala body yet, but they are the vibration signatures of those particular forms of radiation, a particular type of radiation. Each one will have a different quantum than the others. So they're specifically quantified, 15 specifically quantified energy forms, all right, and spheres. All right, we have the Ra, the Sha, and the La. And then 13, 14, and 15, we have the Ka, K-H-A, the Tha, and the Ra, Kathara. Right? So when we're teaching Kathara, we were working with those things, the outer ones, the 13, 14, and 15. This is just the beginning of a process through which light body grows. And if we go to the next one, please. Because the same process by which light body grows, you'll see in a second, is the same process that ends up as the prana exchange process in the larger Rasha bodies. So this is looking at the Partaki, that center sphere, with all of its 15 layers without seeing the other 3 Partaki sparks around it. So you can just see the divisions of them, like how they are, the sizes of them in relation to each other, the sizes of the layers in relation to each other. This becomes important because by the time it all comes out in a manifestation, this is the pattern that sets what the first 3 end up, 1, 2, and that's 3, I don't have my number on it, 1, 2, and 3, they end up as the solid core. The next 4, 5, and 6 end up as what's the liquid core. The 7, 8, and 9 end up as what's called the mantle. The 10, 11, 12 end up as what is called the atmosphere. And 13, 14, and 15 end up as what is called the coronasphere. So these are literally the things that will give us later, as you'll see, the structure of what a stellar body is. And all a planet body is a stellar body that has its coronasphere shut off because it can't run the 13, 14, and 15 frequencies. All right? So this is where it all starts, way back there, in cosmic creation. Next one, please. Yes. Okay, I want to see this part here, honey, please. Yeah. Now, if you notice, there are spheres, and spheres of Jaleesic radiation. These spheres are referred to as the layers. All right. Now, in between each layer, there is actually what is called a crystalline band. All right. This is the beginning of where matter forms, and it's like before templates of matter kind of thing. But they are literally crystalline orbs. But they're not called orbs yet, not way back in the Partaki. But they're crystalline bands in between Jaleesic states of frequency. The crystalline bands are formed because the spheres, the frequency, say, of number 7 and number 8, these are spinning spheres. They rub on each other. And in the place where they meet, and there's a certain extent, like there's the place that would be the outside of the inner sphere, where it interfaces directly with the frequencies of the next sphere out. It forms a combination of energy. It would be a ta and a ma. We'll give you the mata field, right? This has to do with the formation of matter, right? Mata ores that later become matter or matter ores. Right? So these bands, these things are called bands. They're called crystalline bands that exist between the layers. When we get to the Rasha body structure, the big one that is a macrocosmic expression of this microcosmic light Partaki, we'll end up with the bands between becoming what are called the spans. And that's when we get into spanner gates that we've talked about. And the Jaleesic layers become what are called the rings, or the Rasha rings. And it is the ring tones and the span tones that we use to activate the Rasha bodies. So this is where it all starts, but this is looking at the Partaki, but the same diagrams can be used to show you the same thing. When we look at names, and this is where you start to understand span tones, you have ring tones here. There's a certain way of using the tones that go with each of the layers, which become rings on the Rasha body. And in between them, if you have the 1 and 2, you have the nada here and the adama here as far as the Jaleesic layers. In between it, going this way, you would have the adama nada, right? Here you would have Jaffa and adama, the Jaffa adama. So this is how these double signatures of the crystalline bands that are between them form. And these are the tones that will later, they are the same tones in the Rasha bodies, the larger Rasha bodies, and those are the tones that will literally activate the Rasha bodies. And the Rasha bodies do some amazing things when they activate. Oh, and back here, by the way, outside, what's outside of here? They refer to this when you get past ring 15 or past layer 15, you have the band 15, and then what? Right? Because it's all in consciousness source field somewhere. They call this the Oriya, dark light vibration field. That's all they've said so far. They may expand on that with tomorrow's information. Next one, please. I'm going to pick the pace up a little bit so we get to, because some of you have seen this stuff before, and I don't know, we're going to pick up a little bit. Alrighty, next part. Now, looking at the Pardaki again, in the Pardaki, where the first little Pardaki forms, it is the bands that begin the formation or hold the programs of what become the elemental commands. All right, and they reverse at a certain point. These two, where first we have, let's see. See, these are the bands. Later, the layers or the rings of the Rasha body actually form the elemental commands. But it starts here with programs that are held in these specific bands. And they're held as Jalesic encryption, which means little points of vibrating energy made of the specific frequency of band that made of the specific frequencies that particular band is holding, or the specific types of radiation that the band is holding. Where we'd have the 1, 2, and 3 are referred to as the ethers, okay? And it's also known as cloud command. They refer to those as cloud command. Then coming out here would be the programs for solids, which is interesting because these bands become the liquid ones when you get out to the Rasha bodies. The in between, I had to look at. I'm not going to take forever to read each one of these and compare them here. But the bands between the 7, 8, and 9 set, they form they hold the liquids program, and later these are the layers that become the mantle or the solids. And so this is where it starts. Out here you have what become the gases. All right, these are where the programs are stored, as far as what will later manifest as those types of matter, and what comes before, the Rasha layers. All right, so we have the solids, the ethers, or the cloud. It's really, the ethers end up as frozen when you get into Rasha body structure, so it becomes solid. You end up with the ethers, the earth, or the solids, or the crystal command. You end up with the liquids, or what are called the flows, and they end up in the Rasha position of 4, 5, and 6, called the aquifers. And that's what's flow command called? The flows command, or the water command. And then you end up with the programs for the gases or the air. This is actually known as the wind command. All right, the wind or air command. This is where when you hear Wiccans talk about earth, air, fire, water, earth, air, fire, water, and some of them actually include ether, but they don't exactly know where they go or what order you're supposed to call them. All right, when they are calling those, when there is those ancient rites that have this playing with elemental forces, what they're doing are trying to bring in frequencies through the light body of the Rasha bodies and the light frequencies that correspond to those. But if you're not using the right programs and you have a mutated light body, you're going to get mutated elemental forces as well. So these are taking us back to understanding where the elemental forces form in the Rasha bodies, and that, bless you, in the Rasha bodies form from the Pardaki structure and the template that was set there. And there is a whole structure that creates what is called the elemental command, and we can begin to work with that elemental command when we begin activating the Rasha body. And we can use the natural elemental command that is always there, because the Rasha body stands between the light body and the spirit body. So it is still viable, and the spirit body always holds the imprint or the program of the Rasha body. So if the Rasha body itself became damaged, the spirit body still holds the memory matrix that would allow for it to be healed. And the Rasha body, a healed Rasha body, can then go outward and heal the light body. And that can go outward and heal the matter body. And that's what we're working with, as well as activating Kryst star. We're also activating these parts of the matter body system that can go through a healing really going down to the core, not just to the Kal-hara template, but to much, much deeper into first creation. All right. So this and this out here, by the way, are called the vapors. These are the programs for what is called the fire command. The fire command is referred to as the vapors. We get into different types of matter that form on these, and we'll look at that later when we get into Rasha structure, but I want to get you into the big bodies first. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens to get to Rasha.